Where do you have time for hobbies?
It was my first time in my life only having one job.
Instagram hashtag wandering heart.
A/B test it.
Hey, 5-year-old, like put the piece here, now push it down.
My life kind of blew up.
Train them better, develop them better.
So you can find digital nomad
nomads.
groups all over the world.
You're not like a 6'4", 250-pound guy,
You're just going to live in that drama.
which is a nicer way to put it than homeless.
You're probably just being a dick. Not every employee works out.
Sometimes people are very quick to judge.
We saw a cockroach in our hotel room.
You live in the dream. Welcome back to the Roll with Steve podcast. I'm still in San Diego, but this time interviewing the better half of the Hainzer family, Eva, an expert in digital marketing, Amazon marketplaces, and working with international remote employees. See, everything I know about hiring and working with remote teams, I learned it from Eva Hainzer. And after hiring and working with dozens, she has some amazing insights that she shares in this episode about how to make it work for you. But before we jump into that, sometimes you just look at someone's life, and at the surface, it looks like everything you'd ever want. But I've learned over time, that never happens by accident. So how do you set up your life to be the envy of others? I asked Eva Hainzer that question, and her response? I'll let you hear it right from her. I just want to jump right in because I feel like you're living the life that so many women want in more ways than one. If I'm like throwing this off, you've got the high-powered job, your agency owner, entrepreneur, multiple brands, dream host in production, baby on the way, happily married. Like, what am I missing there?
I think you got it.
Okay. Where do you have time for hobbies with all of that going on?
Well, traveling is my hobby, which we're doing right now. So that's why we go to so many places, even though we are so busy and have so much going on. It's like, that's my hobby, is being new places. So, yeah, I find time for life. Like, work-life balance has always been really important. It's the reason I work so hard, is to enjoy my life. So if I'm not enjoying my life, to me, none of it's worth it.
Yeah. Well, work-life balance is such an interesting one because I was actually putting some polls up on social media the other day about work-life balance.
Yeah.
And what I found interesting is that the LinkedIn community, which is more of that corporate professional community,
Yeah.
about 50% of them said it does exist.
Yeah. I
Then
saw that. I
off of
participated.
LinkedIn. Oh, you did? Okay. You said it does exist.
Yeah.
On Twitter, where it's the hustle culture, the hustle community, I think it was 65% of people. Yeah, 65% of people said that it does not exist.
Yeah.
Which
Well,
I found
that's their own
interesting,
fault.
right? So why do you say that?
Well, you have time for what you prioritize. So when someone says, like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I didn't have time to text you back, it's like, you had the time, but you prioritized something else. And so if you're just working, 18 hours a day and not giving yourself the time either in the morning or the evening to enjoy life, like, you're making that choice. And so to me, I make the choice to like cut off at a certain point. Like, hey, we're going to have fun. And a lot of business owners, like, there's times I do work on weekends, but I try really hard to actually leave Saturday and Sunday untouched by work.
Yeah.
And I'd rather have like really busy days during the week and give myself that brain break, because I need to be able to like go out and do stuff, go to the beach or shopping, getting my nails done, like golfing with Steve, like whatever it might be.
Yeah. There's so many people who are out there who don't have a desire to take a break, and then you see them burn out later down the road.
Yeah, I've seen it and I've done it.
Yeah.
And that's why I know if I just like go through and work weeks on end, working Saturdays and Sundays and evenings and all of that, I'll hit my burnout quicker. So I actually I don't get very stressed, even though people think I'm just constantly stressed because of how much I do.
Yeah.
I'm actually not stressed at all.
Well, you do a ton, and that's what is striking for me is how much you have going on at any given time. And I've talked to other people who are juggling an awful lot, and they talk about how, well, I've basically built up a tolerance. I practiced juggling so much for so long that now this is just me working at my normal capacity now. Like, did you have a ramp up period like that where you got used to doing a ton and you added things sequentially to it? What was that like?
Yeah, definitely. Like when I was traveling the 2 years I was abroad, I owned a business at that point. And to be honest, I probably put 4 to 5 hours a day of work into that business, and that business paid for my travel at that point in my life. And that was all I cared about. I was like, I don't need to put a minute more into anything. At that point, it was my first time in my life only having one job, because all through college, I had numerous jobs. I had side hustles, a full-time job, all of that. And I then kind of took the space to just travel, work as little as possible. And then as I came back, I started adding new things in. So I started working with brands outside of my full-time job, such as your brand, and just little by little, and then getting, the Airbnb, and then the next Airbnb, and then starting a brand or buying a brand, and then months later starting a brand. Like it was dripped in over the last few years to build up at this point what I have going.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like I just started everything at once. And I think the biggest thing is like the commitment in the beginning is the biggest. Starting the Airbnb, like buying it, furnishing it, getting it on Airbnb was like 2 months of just constant.
Yeah.
And now it's like I send check-in instructions like on a walk.
Yeah.
Like, and it's a 5-minute thing, and it's like, it's
you like systematized it to make it more simple.
Yeah. So you put a lot of effort in the beginning up front to something, and that's how I'm able to start something, get a process going for it, and then it's more hands off. And that's kind of how it was like with Couples Coffee and Fantaswick. Is when we first bought them, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so much work.
Yeah.
And then we've hired people to do things we don't have the time to do. And we've gotten processes in place. We launched new products. We got a process for launching new products much quicker than before.
Yeah.
And so now at this point, it's like I can write a design brief for a designer to create candles. Like I just sent one out last week. In an hour, I came up with, I think it was 16 new candle labels.
Yeah.
And then sent the brief off. And I'm like, before that would take me so much market research, the scents and like what we should call them and like the branding. And now I can do it in an hour. So it's like,
I want to know how long it took you the first time you ever made your first product to do the exact same thing. Like, was that days?
Days.
And you have that down to 16 in an hour.
I also would second guess myself. So I started product design back when I worked at the agency I worked at before Jungle Scout. And that was my first experience with product design. And I would send it to family members and friends. And I would want all this feedback because I wasn't confident in myself to like produce a product, like start to finish without all these eyes on it. And now I make the brief, I send it to the designer. Between myself and the designer, we're getting it to like a finished product. And then we'll use PickFu to, A/B test it. And, Steve will look at it. And most of the time he's like, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
And so
it's great.
like,
I love what you love.
the amount of eyes that go on it now and the amount of time has just reduced like so significantly.
Yeah. But you worked your way up to that point.
Exactly.
I want to go all the way back.
Okay.
Because you talk about traveling and having that first business while you're traveling. This is after college is done, you started traveling?
Yeah, so I got my bachelor's, took a year off, got my master's. A year after my master's is when I left the country.
Okay, so you're how old at that point?
I think I left the country at 26 years old, yeah.
26.
Yeah.
Okay, why? Why leave? Most people get out of school, they get a job, they move back home, they do something. You decided to...
to give up my life. After getting my master's, I highly considered getting a PhD, and I was applying to programs to get my PhD. And then at that point, I had
been a PhD in like marketing or business?
No, in communication.
Communications.
Yeah, I wanted to be a professor.
Okay.
But at that point, I had started a business with a couple that I was friends with in Idaho, and I started working from home. So I was doing the remote work thing before it was like the popular thing to do. And then at that point, my life kind of blew up. I, was cheated on. And at that point, I was like, I have two options here. I stay in Idaho and keep living this life where you're dating shitty guys and there's like this dead end. Like it looked to me at that point, my life was a dead end if I didn't do something different. So at that point, I had my remote job, found a remote community to join. And within weeks after that occurrence, I was literally out of the country within less than 6 weeks. I had sold everything I owned, got a passport, and I was gone.
Just the flexibility that you created for yourself to be able to cut ties like that.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people get into an instance where things are not going how they want. They get into a similar scenario, but they say, oh, but I'm stuck. Either they already have a kid, they're tied down to family and they're unable to leave.
You have an in-person job that you can't replace.
So it doesn't sound like there was any sense of like foresight that any of this was coming where you prepared. You just happened to be luckily prepared in this way where you could up and do it?
I don't believe in luck. I believe God put me in that position. And I firmly believe in that moment because I had said a prayer like one evening, like, God, my life, I don't think is on the right track. And I know you've probably given me signs in the past, but this time I promise you I'll listen. And I swear to you within minutes, my ex's phone lit up. And that's how I found out he was cheating. It was within minutes of that prayer.
Wow.
And that's when I was like, I knew God had a different plan for my life and a different path. And he listened to that prayer immediately and like fulfilled it. And I believe that everything leading up to that, he prepared me because he had put it on my heart to get out of the office environment because I was getting harassed almost daily at the office. I would go out and call my mom crying in the parking lot. And, she prayed with me often in the parking lot. And it had been on my heart, like, you don't belong in an office. This is not the environment for you. Put it on my heart to get a remote job. All of these things that led up to everything I have now, including my husband and my child now, because had I not traveled remotely, I wouldn't have met the person who introduced me to my husband.
Yeah.
And if I hadn't met my husband, I never probably would have bought a property and gotten into Airbnb and I wouldn't be pregnant right now. So it's like, I think that prayer and that moment literally was like what started the whole path of everything I have right now.
Well, you talk about how it all leads to something that you love the way your life is going now. And it's envy for many people that want that too. But what you had to go through that in order to get where you are, like your whole life kind of blows up in that moment. Like who wants to put up with that to get to the dream on the other side of that?
Yeah.
Without having the vision of where you're going and knowing that it's all going to end up okay. And to your point, you had God on your side to make that happen. But I met you when you were out wandering, or I guess it was exposed to you for the first time when you were out and you were Instagram hashtag or handle wandering heart.
Yeah.
Right? I keep waiting for you to change it to like heart found a home or something like that, like when is that going to happen? Yeah. It's still wandering heart?
Yeah.
Okay. Always will be?
I think so. It's pretty
cool. You've been branded that way.
Yeah.
I guess that's perfectly fine. But as you're out traveling and you're having what I assume was amazing experiences that like, let's just start there. Like most people don't get the chance to go out and do that.
Yeah.
Is it the chance or did you make the chance happen for yourself? I've never left North America. I'd like to say that I traveled in my 20s, but I didn't.
Yeah.
You found a way to make it happen. For better or worse.
Yeah.
But like you made it happen. It didn't just come to you.
No, definitely made it happen. It seemed so simple when you think about boiling it all down to the couple weeks that I had and selling everything and saying my goodbyes, throwing a goodbye party that weeks before that I hadn't had planned. It all seemed so simple, but it wasn't simple. There was so much I was letting go of. I at that point had like, I think 9, 10 nieces and nephews living in Idaho, my entire family saying, parting ways with my dad, who was the reason I never went out of state for college. I always stayed, that bond that I had with him. There was so much I said goodbye to, but I knew in that moment, my life, like there was 2 paths that I could choose. And not to say that my life would have sucked if I stayed in Idaho, and know plenty of people who stayed in Idaho and have great lives. But the life that I envisioned for myself, I knew was not possible if I didn't leave.
Yeah.
So although it wasn't simple, it actually was an easy decision because staying in Idaho seemed like a more difficult path than leaving.
Yeah. Well, I think it's remarkable the number of people whose lives change for the better when they leave home after high school or college. Like the ones that go back, it's just a different trajectory and it works out differently for different people.
Yeah.
But okay, you decided to go travel. How do you know where to go, how to survive? Like you're not like a 6'4", 250-pound guy that's going to take care of himself regardless of where he is. You're just traveling the world. Like I think when I was first introduced to you, you were in Thailand, or maybe it was Bali.
Yeah,
like I don't
Bali,
know.
yeah.
Like how do you know where to go and travel?
Well, for the first year, I joined a group of remote workers who were traveling the world. It was called We Roam. And
Where did you find them? Like a Facebook
I
group?
literally
or something?
Googled it. Like,
Okay.
yeah, and found this group.
I'm looking for people to travel with who also work.
I applied for it. Everybody in that group had lost a loved one, got cheated on, had their life blown up. There wasn't a single person who was enjoying the life they had. Something traumatic didn't happen to them, because most people don't just one day sell everything they own and leave the country. That is not a common thing to do. Every single person had something traumatic happen to them, and that's how we all bonded. But that was like the growth of all of it, is every single person that was in that group, they're doing amazing things. Like they're like multiple of them are multimillionaires now, own their own companies. A lot of them are still traveling the world. Like when I look at that pool of people that I know compared to everybody else I've met in my life, they are the most successful people that I know. And I think it all started with that moment of tragedy, and you can choose to stay sad and stuck in your tragedy and stay in the same path that you're in when whatever it is happens to you, or you can, because your life is already blown up, it's so easy to put the pieces back together in a different way, and that is what we all did.
And the easiest way to do that is just leave and go bond with a bunch of other people who are going to do the exact same thing.
That was the path that we all chose. And it's, as I said, it's led me to where I am now. I'm sure there's other ways to make that work. But I think most of the time when you face a tragedy, if you stay in the exact same thing that you're in, you're just going to live in that trauma.
So what are these groups of people called that you joined? Like I've heard terms for like homeless people as like traveling kids, which is a nicer way to put it than homeless. But like, what would you call this group of?
We call it digital nomads. So you can find digital nomad groups all over the world. Google it. You can find a way to meet up with other people who have remote jobs. And
So if I see someone that says digital nomad in their LinkedIn profile, like I can make some guesses about what happened in their past.
Yeah, something happened
that made them want to do it. Because there's a distinction. There's the kids who go do a gap year after high school.
Yeah.
And I just talked to someone last week who like can't wait to graduate. He's doing a gap year. He's going to go to Bali for a year, and then he's going to come back and figure out if he goes to college, if he starts a business from there. That's on one side. The other side is these are digital nomads who have jobs, who are just doing that while they're traveling. But it's like you're almost running from something and trying to find something new.
See, people say running from something, and I always felt like it was running towards something, not away from. So I was running towards a better future for myself. And that's
Did you always have that perspective, or did that shift as you were part of this group? Because at some point as you're leaving Idaho, it must have felt like you were running from something.
Yeah, I guess so. I think that the perspective shifted within probably weeks of just my life being exponentially better than it ever had been.
Yeah. And that was because of the travel, the job, the community that you built of that?
Yep. All of it. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. Why do you think that this community of digital nomads 5 years later turns into $1 million business owners and successful people who are driven and competent and handling more than the average person?
There's, it's not to sound like corny, but when you travel, it really does open you up to new things. It opens your worldview, and you're meeting people you never would have met before. I met so many business owners while traveling of different types of businesses and they're all so encouraging of you starting your own business. And if you're in your hometown hanging out with the same 6 to 10 people you've been hanging out with for years doing the same thing, you're not opening up your worldview. And that's what happened to us, is we met so many people around the world who were doing incredible things. And for every single one of us, we're like, we can do that.
And they're all doing that remotely. Like these are businesses that are not,
and they're
like,
all
local to where
traveling and
you
having
are.
fun. And like you can do both. You can have both. And that's where I really, really learned work-life balance is being able to, I took, at the time I was in sales, but I would take sales calls from like a bathroom, like a dirty bathroom on an island in the middle of Asia, and I would close a deal and then go take shots at the bar.
Oh, what are you selling at the time? Like, you're just
yeah, it was at the time it was cloud technology.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hold my beer. I'm gonna go sell some cloud technology.
I
real
would
quick.
rip a couple shots and then go on a sales call, like in a bathroom.
Did you find
at a
out that was
bar.
helpful?
I actually did. I was
Okay.
like, maybe drinking is good for salespeople because it really loosened me up.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was like where you were able to do both. You were able to have fun, but also make money.
Did your customers have any idea where you were calling them from?
No idea, because I was using an Idaho number. So it would come from an Idaho number. Nobody had any idea that for me it was 1 a.m.
Yeah. Like, I think I hear a bar in the background. It's like 9 a.m. over here. Where are you at right now? I just ripped a few shots. No big deal. That's crazy. Okay. I got to ask this question. Top 3 places that you ever traveled to?
Okay. Bali obviously is number one.
Okay.
I mean, that is like second to none. I mean, that's where I ended up going after my year of travel with the group. I lived there 7 months after that because I was just like blown away by it. Absolutely amazing. And then I would say Croatia, just for its beauty. That was like, it was like living in a castle. It was absolutely amazing. And then city. So we'll go with a city for this one, Singapore. Cleanest city, safest city, transportation, second to none. Like, everybody is nice. I mean, it's just such a high functioning society. You feel like you're in the Avatar because it's so clean and beautiful, but everybody's so high functioning. No, there was no homeless. Like, it didn't look like there was poverty there.
That's crazy.
Insane.
I've heard that about Singapore too. Even as a kid, I remember people talking about how you get fined for like spitting your gum out.
Yeah, but gum is illegal.
It's illegal.
Yeah,
That's
no,
what
it's
it was.
contraband.
Yeah.
So yeah, no gum.
That's insane. And these experiences you're having, okay, break it down for someone like me who has never left North America before. What are the big things I'm missing out on by not having traveled the way that you did?
I think it's just, as I mentioned, opens up your worldview. You're meeting so many different people. So I was speaking with like locals. It wasn't like I was only hanging out with the people from my group. Like, I made friends with a lot of people from different countries. I legitimately was like so naive to leave the country thinking that every country that I went to, that they wanted to be Americans. And then I go to third world countries in Asia, and I'm speaking to locals there, and I say, hey, have you ever wanted to go to the US? They're like, no. I live in Bali. Why would I want to go to the US? And all of a sudden I realized, like, we have this perception that everybody wants to be American and come to America, and then you leave America and realize people are just living their lives the same way we are here. They're enjoying it. They're people who have much less than we do here. They don't have the luxuries that we have, but they were much happier than people in Bali who born and raised in Indonesia were the happiest people I'd met in my life. And they grew up with so little. And they were so grateful and so happy. And they never had it on their mind that they would need to leave because they were so happy with where they were.
What did that do for your perspective? 26, 27, 28 years old, coming from America, bachelor's, master's degree behind you, to see people living like that and content.
Yeah. It made me appreciate so much more, and I definitely became less of a diva, I would say. So a good example is right before going on this 2-year trip, I went to Catalina Island with my best friend Jessie, and we saw a cockroach in our hotel room, and I lost it. Yeah. I got our whole 7-day stay comped. I got us upgraded to a better suite. I was like, I can't have this. A cockroach in my room? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Fast forward to a year later, I find a cockroach quite frequently in my rooms in Asia. I find one. I'll go out and I would, step out into the desk and it'd be like, there's a cockroach in my room. You don't have to kill him, just like swipe him up. And, was just like chill about it. I was like, yeah. And, they'd go in, I'd see him about to stomp. I'm like, no, don't kill it. Just put it outside.
Yeah.
And so I went from like, I'm going to complain to the manager because this isn't up to my taste to like, it's a cockroach. Like, it's all good. Like, just wipe it away. So yeah, I think it just made me appreciate so much more what I have now. And I try not to lose sight of that because I will see myself starting to lose sight of that as I get, especially having lived in California for 5 years after coming back from traveling for 2 years, the influence of Californians and everything needing to be perfect and just so and how they want it and how they paid for it.
Yeah.
I try to remember, like, we have things so amazing here that other people from other like countries can't even comprehend, and they're much happier than us. So it's like, it's not like, don't sweat the little things, basically.
Yeah. Does that translate to you order your steak medium rare and it comes out well done and you just say, well, I'm just happy to have steak?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, unless it's inedible, and then I'm like, okay, if I can't eat this, but yeah.
You need someone like me there who's happy to send a steak back at Applebee's if it doesn't come out the way I wanted it to. Like, I don't care where I'm at. If I said medium rare, it needs to be medium rare. So you attribute a part of why your life has gone the way it has to these travels that you did. How old were you when you came back from traveling?
So it was from 26 to I think 28. So I was 28 when I came back.
2 years from that.
I met Steve basically upon my husband Steve, upon entering the US again. I was still like jet lagged the first time that I met him at his Super Bowl party. And, the plan from there was to go, spend a couple months to see family in the US, family and friends, and then go back to Asia, live in Bali. And I met him, not even a week back in the US. And then next thing you know, I'm moving to California.
Yeah.
Where I've been.
Listen, call me biased, but obviously your husband and I were roommates in college and go back 20 years. But I think you found one of the best men that's out there, but also a high-powered entrepreneurial thinker, great sales guy, a high-income earner. And between the two of you, like, I sit there and look from the outside looking in, you're both massively busy. You're doing some stuff together, but you have your own lanes that you're killing it in respectively.
Yeah.
You got a kid on the way. You're building a $1 million home in Texas. And it's like you're living the dream. Like, to anyone who's out like looking in, like, what are we missing about like what you put in to get here? Because I know from my own experience that sometimes people are very quick to judge where you're at right now and say, oh, you've got it good. You're so blessed.
Yeah.
And I go, well,
I worked for this.
Am I blessed?
Yeah.
What is that like for you? Because it's, as a couple, and I would argue as a power couple, you're so set up for success going forward. And someone looks at that and says, well, I want that. Like, what are they not doing that you did to achieve what you have right now?
Well, putting in the time and making sacrifices. So, one of the things financially to build myself up is, I always lived, and still we live below our means, but that was something that I had been doing since, high school when I got my first job. I didn't spend every penny I had. And in college, to be honest, I shopped at Goodwill up until meeting Steve. And then he's like, no, we can get you new clothes. And I was like, okay, just shopping at Goodwill. That's how I was raised. I always shop on clearance. He, one of the things he appreciated about me in the beginning was, you're such a cheap date because I get the least expensive thing on the menu. And, I'm always looking for ways to save. And so living below your means is a big one that I think that this generation is not good at, because it's the treat yourself, generation.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And sometimes you have to not treat yourself to be able to, for a year I lived in downtown Long Beach. I got a really great deal with a friend to pay like a couple $100s to live in like what was supposed to be like a business unit on like the first floor of like her apartment. And it was just like a room basically. And anyways,
Was it legal for that to be a residence?
Probably not. No. And I would spend, it wasn't an ideal living situation, but I spent a couple $100s a month to live there. I saved up enough money to then buy an Airbnb at the end of having saved up all that money from. At that point, I could have gotten my own nice apartment for, $2,000+ a month and had my own space and actually had like a living room and like a bathroom that didn't have like a handicap like sign on it.
Yeah,
and,
right.
like it was, but at the time I was like, this is something I want to do. Steve had encouraged me to buy a home. He was at that point in contract with his home in Austin. And so I was like, okay, like, how do I do this? How do I live really below my means? Which is hard to do in California. So yeah, just like sacrificing sometimes having fun, or at least having fun for less. And then the amount of time, because there were times in the beginning of all this, like, for example, one time, Steve invited me out with friends. We had known each other a couple months and I just moved to California for him. But he was like, yeah, come out with me and my friends. And it was a Friday night. And I was like, I have work to do. And he's like, what do you mean you have work to do? It's Friday night. But at that point, I was working on starting my own agency. And so there was my full-time job and I had to put the time during the day into that. And so at that point, I was like, well, I have to put evening time into this. And if I don't go out with him tonight, I was going to make $500 for the project I was working on. And in my mind, I was like, I could go out tonight and probably spend money or stay home and make $500. And so I, at that point, made the decision to be like, no, I'll catch you tomorrow.
Yeah.
So.
And how many would make that decision if given the opportunity? It's like, I got to have fun while I'm young, I want to dig into a different topic, but before we leave this one, let's just pretend that the 18-year-old version of yourself sits in this chair instead of you and wants the life that you're living right now. What's the number one piece of advice you would give an 18-year-old Eva to achieve where you're at today?
Oh man, yeah, that's, I guess, difficult. I guess honestly, it would be to pray, because that is like what I truly believe led me here, was in those moments where there was the split path and your life could have gone two different ways. Like, I feel like I was good at praying and listening to what I felt God was leading me to. And so to be able to make the sacrifices I did of sometimes not having fun and sacrificing time and living below my means, it was all because of guidance of prayer and which way I wanted my life to go. Because if I just lived in the moment constantly and didn't plan for the future, I'd be in a really different spot than I am right now.
Yeah. So you and I have spent a lot of time working together over the years, and it's given me the opportunity to kind of be an outside looking in at your style. One of the things that you may not have known about that you probably taught me the most was, well, first of all, opening my eyes to this idea of hiring offshore and expanding a company and achieving scalability through having a team that is working remote offshore. But if I had to articulate what I think your superpower is, it's, yes, you can hire a team offshore and you can get a ton out of that team. Like, you know how to manage that team. You've done it for a decade now. Like, you're super good at it. But when I was watching from the outside looking in, you working with managers in America who were going to manage and hire teams offshore and get them to the same level that you were at with that, that's where I look at and say, that's a superpower. Because it's hard to figure out how to navigate through that if it's just you managing them and trying to make yourself more scalable. But to take someone else and get them into a mindset where they're able to get a high amount of quality work from someone who's in a different country, maybe a language barrier that's there, and to do it predictably and to not fire the person halfway through because they think, oh, I have the wrong person for the job. Because I noticed a trend, and I want to give a little bit more context here. The trend that I notice of people who are operating, and it's not just with remote environments or for people who are offshore, it's kind of everywhere, but I would say in particular, it's accentuated when you're dealing with a team that's offshore. When you hire the person, you expect them to be able to do the job that it says on their resume that they're able to do. And in 2 weeks that they've started with you, they're not giving you the product that you were hoping for. And they think, oh, I hired the wrong person. Let me go back and try this again. I see something different in you, not having a willingness to develop that talent and then not allowing the leaders that work for you to be in an environment where they are not developing talent. It's like, no, this is the person you need. You need to communicate better. You need to train them better, develop them better. Now that I've thrown all this at you of what I see in you, I think it's a superpower. Where does that come from? Where is your ability to help other people manage these remote workforces and to develop them into like the budding managers that I've seen you do over time? Like, how do you know how to do that?
Well, I think it all goes back to my first management experience in college when I worked at a newspaper and I was promoted to editor-in-chief, and all of a sudden I had a staff of writers below me who were college students, and a lot of them freshmen, and they're doing the freshman partying and all of their homework and trying to get them to actually work, and realizing like they're really talented writers, but it is just trying to communicate to them what I need from them and being strict on deadlines. I would say that's where I really developed those management experiences, and I did it early on in college. So I think that contributed to being able to work with people who just need a lot of direction. And throughout almost every position that I've been in a management position. And so I think over time, I just have developed those things. And then it translated to working with offshore employees when I worked at the agency. And that was my first experience doing it. And I remember at first thinking, like, after, messaging back and forth and not getting the results, I'm like, this can't be the right person for this. And then at that point, I had traveled for 2 years. And I remember thinking, like, being lost in South Korea and literally being out in the middle of nowhere at like a bus station trying to figure out how to get back to Seoul. And no one spoke English, and they're trying to help me, and having to sort through that situation of none of us speaking the same language and me being literally like 2 hours out from where I was meant to be. Instead of panicking, I had to figure it out. And then I remembered that situation and I was like, it's not that they don't know what they're doing. It's because I communicated it in a language that's not native to them. And so that's where creating like the design briefs and being very visual, like sending Loom videos to walk through this is what needs to be done, and sending examples of images that I like so that they can compare it. Because a lot of the times it really is, it's the language barrier. And sometimes they're just not interpreting the words the way that you want them to. And so becoming more visual with what you're doing is basically one of the first things that I adapted, was just making sure I use a lot of visuals, Loom videos, over communicating. And then from there, I developed with a lot of the offshore employees that I've worked with a shorthand, where then you don't need to do that anymore because they get to know you and they get to know what you're looking for. So I think instead of just giving up right away on someone and thinking it's their lack of skills, it's not. It's just they are used to using different language than you, and that doesn't make them less smart than you. Because I'm sure if I was trying to communicate in a different language that I wasn't native to, I would not sound like I knew what I was talking about, right? So I think it's just being very understanding and having the patience and then developing that relationship. And that's when you can create that shorthand with them where you don't have to over-explain everything.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen some of the creative briefs you talk about where it's very clearly over-explaining. And it was a lesson for me from seeing that of, if you want to get the most out of a remote worker who maybe doesn't speak the same language, or a virtual assistant, like stipulating exactly what you want with a video of how, like what it should look like. Here's the template I made for you. Fill this in. This is the drive I want it to go into when it's done.
Yeah.
And this is the vision for it, and that why, and articulating all of that so that you get the right result back the first time. Like that's special. And I feel like I'm seeing a system that you iterated on to come to the solution of like, this is what works.
Yeah.
I'm sure it wasn't that way when you first started.
For sure.
And that design brief now that we use across our company,
Yeah.
that it's I'm seeing results that come through right the first time when I know that wasn't the case. And so when I branch out and I start a new company and we're hiring offshore again, and the managers are not able to get the same level of product back the first time or the 10th time from the same types of teams, I look at that and I say, like, there's something really special about how you were doing it and how you taught your managers how to do it. So I had a conversation with one of my team members in the new business not even a week ago. And he was super frustrated. He came in, he's like, we've got the wrong team. Like, I have to do 70% of the work to get them to give me what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
What do you say to that?
Kind of what I mentioned before about upfront investment. So with an employee, when you first hire them, you have to realize that the first 3 months, typically that ramp up period, you're going to be doing most of the work. You're going to be checking every little thing. You're going to be putting more time into your job, into the job in general, than you did before you hired them. And that's when you get pissed off. You're like, why am I paying this person? Now I'm putting more time. It's supposed to save me time.
Yeah.
Well, it typically takes any employee really 90 days to ramp up and to fully understand a job and to be able to have some autonomy. So I say be patient. If you're not giving someone 90 days to ramp up, then you're probably just being a dick.
Yeah.
And so I think being very hands-on, over communicating, and giving tons of feedback, like lots of detailed feedback in the beginning, is going to save you, because they're going to learn what you like, what you're looking for, to be able to implement that in the future, and then to start being able to build on that themselves and come up with their own ideas, because now they know how your mind works and what you're looking for.
Yeah. I gave him much the same answer, except I did it more so in like analogy format, where it's like, you ever like taught a kid how to do a puzzle?
Yeah.
You know, like they have no idea where to even get started. And it gets to a point where you have to do like 90% of the work. Like, hey, 5-year-old, like put the piece here and now push it down. Like, you see how that works?
Yeah.
And years later, they come home from school, you come home from work, and the puzzle is like fully done. And you see that, okay, you know how to do this now. But it takes so much time for them to be able to learn. And at first, like, you have to do for them, show them what right looks like.
Yeah.
And then you do it with them. And you give them a little bit of leeway and say, hey, like, you do this corner over here, like, I'll do the rest of it. And slowly over time, like 2 years goes by and they know exactly what you want.
Yeah.
I've seen it with my own, my personal assistant, executive assistant, who there have been so many times over the last 2 years that she's been working with me that people have said, well, if I had Jazz, her name is Jazz. If I had Jazz, like, I'd be able to do that too. If I had someone who was as competent and as good as she is, and she is like super competent and really good at that. But what I always tell them, oh my goodness.
Yeah, I
like,
remember that.
Those first like 3 months, to your point, I put my daughter to sleep. She's done for the day. I go back to work now because it's 9 p.m. California time. That means that it's noon in the Philippines where Jazz is at. And we would get on like, either a recorded call, or we would hop on a live Zoom and do training like every single night for those first 3 months. And so it's no surprise then that 90 days later, she becomes like the rock star. It doesn't take away from her competency, but she was invested in heavily.
Yes.
And so for someone else to look at that and say, well, my assistant started a week ago and they suck.
Well, yeah.
You didn't put any work in yet.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
it's kind
to
of like
develop them.
Yeah, even with like a sales role, do you expect to hire someone in a sales position and them close a deal their first month? No, they need to ramp up to the point where they know the product and they know the customer. And it is the same for any position. And I'd say more so for offshore employees, because you're learning to speak in your own kind of like language, like a middle ground for the two of you, because English isn't their native languages. And even I've worked with, people from the Philippines who speak really good English, but it's still not their native language. So as I said, like just overtraining in the beginning is going to help nurture that relationship and that employee to where you then don't have to be checking in on them daily to see if they need help or,
But it's more so that mindset of the manager who understands that, hey, even though your resume says you're good at this job, you're not going to be good at doing it my way until I teach you how to do it my way.
Yeah, everybody has their own way of doing things. And that's like any new company you work at, you're like, I did this at my last company, but we did it differently.
Yeah.
And you're learning your new company and you're learning that new position and those new personalities around you. So it's like we all go through it. I think just when you're in a management perspective or position, you lose perspective of that, especially if you've been at your company or in your position for years. You forgot what it's like to be new somewhere.
Well, I think that's a problem with managers in general, is that they look at it and say, well, your resume said you could do this job. You're not doing it very well. And the difference of having someone make an investment in you to show you, I'm looking for it to be done this way. Like, where's their equivalent of your design brief that says, do it this way, here's a video, here's an example, put it here when you're done, and then come talk to me and we'll go look over it. Like, that person is developing the person who they want to be. I want to ask you quickly about delivering harsh feedback, because I think that you've been in a position in your agency where you're managing graphic designers and people who are making listings where it's high stakes. Like, you're trying to compete on either Amazon or Shopify or somewhere else on the internet where these images have to be bangers. They have to hit. So to get the right quality product out of it as you're developing that person, I know it requires harsh feedback from someone who's proud of the work that they're handing you. And I want to know from your perspective how you go about hitting the hammer home, like hitting the concept home that I hate what I'm looking at. I know you're proud of it, but it's nothing like what I want it to look like. How do you do that and accomplish that in a way that doesn't hurt morale?
So I don't like the word harsh feedback. I would say constructive. And that's what you have to make sure is that you're, let's say an image you don't like the font. Instead of being like, this font is ugly, you say, I was actually picturing we use a font like this, and attaching an image of the font you were picturing. This color doesn't match. Okay, well, what color were you envisioning? So giving more a clear picture, or as I said, providing more images in the beginning that show what you're looking for. Because if you just tell them, I don't like this, what direction do they have? You need to say what you don't like about it in a nice way, and then give them an example of what you like about a different image or a different font, a different color, a different lifestyle photo. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I'm creating photos for your brand. We had like stock photos of like really creepy, like looking women in like a bathtub that are very like sensual. We're trying to sell soap. Like, this is too sexual for Amazon. And, a part of me wanting to just shake the person and be like, why do you think this is appropriate? But like giving them examples of what a woman bathing maybe is appropriate and what's not, and not freaking out on them, because to me it seems obvious that this is not a good image to use, but it's not obvious to everybody. And as I said, there's always that cultural barrier. Like in Asia, they do use more sensual advertising. So they're a little, I would say, maybe more numb to that. Like, I remember seeing things for like massage, like going to get massages in Asia, that was like, that looks very sexual to me. But like, you have to remember that with everybody, even if you're working with a US employee, there could be cultural differences that tell them like, this is a great lifestyle image. And in your mind, you're like, this is not what I'm looking for. Well, show them what you're looking for.
It's amazing the perspective differences, even of people of the same country, of what I was thinking about when I said it versus what you thought about when you heard me say it. And to write someone off as like, well, nobody in their right mind should have thought that.
Yeah.
It's actually an excuse, I think, for you as the leader or manager didn't communicate what you wanted and you didn't like the vision you got back.
Exactly.
But take responsibility for not communicating that vision.
Yeah.
And so I like what you said, to like constructively and tactfully give that feedback to inform what the vision should have been. And I'm someone who sometimes it's easier for me to see something I hate and then tell you, now that I've seen that, it's still better than a blank slate, because now I know what I'm looking for.
Yeah, you have a jumping off point from there.
Yeah.
Like, you know what you don't want at this point, and you can kind of construct it to be more what you're looking for.
Yeah.
So that's why I try not to get like bummed out when, you know, I'm requesting a product design for a new bag of coffee and I get it back and I'm like, this is not what my brain was picturing. But I'm like, now I have a reference point. Like, this is what they thought. Now I can work with this and tweak it to the point of, so like product design takes a lot of iterations. You're never getting back what your brain had in it in the beginning, even when you're providing examples. And, you know, one thing is like making sure when you provide an example, you're not saying, because what I've done with sending offshore employees design briefs for product design, and I'm like, I give them an example of a candle and then they just copy exactly what that candle looked like. I'm like, no, like this is direction for you. This is what I think is pretty, but we can't just go copy another product. This looks exactly like our competitor. Yeah. So again, like the communication up front of, this is an example of, but please do not copy paste what I'm sending you right now.
Last question. One piece of advice for someone who's going into a role where they know they're going to have to hire a remote work team. What should they be thinking about as they go into that role to be successful in it?
I think just, it's a tough one. I guess just thinking about, I don't know where to go with that.
Think about someone who's one of your managers, for instance, at think of someone like a Jackie who's coming into that role. What do you tell her about being successful working in that environment and what she needs to know to prepare her for success?
So patience is the biggest one. And that is one that I had to really drill home with her, is because at first it was very frustrating for her. Like, what are these images? What are they coming up with? Why are they thinking this? And it was like, you have to have patience and go through that process, because, you know, that was her first experience managing someone. And so I think when I've trained up a lot of managers at this point, and the biggest thing actually I've taught them is having patience with their direct reports, because nobody is easy at first. Like, everybody needs that time and that attention, especially when you're working with offshore employees. So I think that is my biggest advice, is just having the patience to get through that first 3 months. And then I think after that point, you have enough data to think, okay, maybe this person isn't right for it. I've done everything I can. As long as you feel confident that you've done everything you can to provide feedback, to provide training, and to, in the beginning, hold their hand, because that's what they deserve to reach success. If you've done that and they're still not executing, then you consider moving on. And that's just the investment. That's what being a business owner is. It's what being a manager is. Not every employee works out. I've had to lay off a number of employees, and it breaks your heart every time, even if they sucked at their job. Nobody wants to do it, but that is part of being a business owner, is you have to make those tough decisions.
The good with the bad. And if I can sum up our conversation, it's really whether you're getting great results out of working with an offshore team or living the life you're living that people are envious of, they're only seeing that finished result. They're not seeing all the stuff that went in to making that happen. And it's something to aspire to for sure, but also nothing replaces going through those steps yourself to make it happen.
Yeah.
So awesome. Thanks for doing this. This was great.
Yeah.
We'll get some good out of it.
Yeah, it's fun.
Fantastic.